Good evening. I'm Dr. Janice K. Neal Vincent, oral historian of Scott Ford House Incorporated and W.K. Kellogg team. It is September the 16th, 2021. We are here at Ferris Street Baptist Church in Jackson, Mississippi. Mr. James Roberts is the person I am about to interview regarding his knowledge of Mississippi Granny Midwives. Mr. James Roberts, interviewee. Mr. Roberts, what was the time period when you knew of a Mississippi Granny Midwife who worked with you and or your relatives? And specifically, with whom did she work?
Being a product as a child born in the 50s, I was first introduced to the word midwife around the age of 5 years old, which piqued my interest because I never knew what a midwife was. And it was explained to me that this is the one who helped bring life into the world, the way it was explained to me. My being curious, I want to know, what do you mean bring life into the world? They explained to me that these are the people or the personnel who deliver babies. My being the product of a midwife made me be inquisitive. I wanted to know when I was born, where was I born, and the time that I was born. And there's a lot of laughter and humor behind it. My parent told me that I was born in Holmes County, which is the poorest county in the state of Mississippi. Also, you can consider it one of the poorest county in the world. But being born in Pickens, Mississippi, at 62 Nelson Street, where I still reside. And my question was, what time was I born? And the time was 9:30 at night. The experience from the personnel who hoped to make sure that I had adequate entry into the world was a lady named Miss Dump.
Miss Dump?
Miss Dump, as you say, Stump Dump.
Okay.
Whom I never knew her last name. But however, she was a pivotal part of my life up until I say around the age of 13 when she met her demise. Also, there was another elderly lady named Miss Josephine Kirby.
Josephine?
Yes, Miss Josephine Kirby.
C-U-R?
K-I-R-B-Y.
Okay.
Whom my mother would carry fishing all the time. And she said while she was pregnant with me, she and Miss Josephine would always go fishing. And the humorous thing was, she said she was in redback pregnant, as some people refer to it, and say they had gone fishing on what we call the spillway down by Gas Plant Road. She said she and Miss Joe had gone up this long incline, and she didn't know that Miss Joe had a little spring water. And she said they were just fishing, and suddenly they got ready to go, and Miss Joe began to slide. And so she caught Miss Joe, and Miss Joe laughed, and so she said, "Come on, let us go so we can return home." I said, Miss Joe said, I got to catch some fishes for the baby. During that time, no one knew what the gender of the child would have been. So around December the 18th, about 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, I was told that my mother was going into labor. And Miss Dump was over at Aunt Minnie's. And they told Miss Dump to go. They would not say go and get go and fetch the midwife. Miss Dump, along with Miss Josephine Kirby, they had gone and gotten the midwife, from my understanding, the one who delivered me, whose name was Miss Angie Ward. She was a short, stocky-built lady, really nice. I had a chance to know her until her demise, which, if I'm not mistaken, was in the latter 70s. And I was told that I was brought into the world at 9:30 p.m. December the 18th. And once they had delivered me, I didn't respond, because we were told that the midwife would take the baby after they had gotten the umbilical cord, which they would take, some people would say, cloth or a white rag, and place it around your stomach, or as they would call it, they would do it for a belly band in order to shape your navel area. Afterwards, when I was conceived, they would also say that you spank the baby to make them respond by crying. I was told that I didn't respond at the given moment. So Miss Angie gave me to my mother. There was no response. So they passed me around several times to several other people. There was no response. And finally, someone whom I cherish, which was my great-great-great aunt, Minnie Ann Clerk Simpson. And I was told that when I was given to her, she tried to get a response out of me, and the response she gotten was one with pure joy and humor, which was, after she held me, they said she said a few words to me, and the next thing, that I had defecated over her. And she gave me this nickname, which, if you would ever come to where I live, if you would ask for James Roberts, people would be startled and ask, who are you talking about? But if you say Jack, they say, oh yeah, we know Jack Roberts. But making a long story short, my pet name was Jack, and I don't believe in a lot of profanity, but my nickname is Jack Aspercreen. So you all can kind of fill in the blanks. And from that day to this one, we all laughed about it. And I was also told a little joke about Miss Angie, who was the midwife. They said whenever Miss Angie would go to deliver babies, she would always be expecting a meal. She would take the meal, enjoy the meal, and tell the mothers, just push. Just push. You're going to be all right. Just push. They said once she finished eating, finally she had gone to one home, and the lady was about to conceive. So she told Miss Angie, I'm not cooking, and I don't want you to tell me to push. If you can't deliver this baby, you can go on and send me someone who can. And thus began Miss Angie's serious midwife work, where they said she began to actually have physical contact and deal with trying to bring children into the world.
Okay, that was just really very, very interesting. I could imagine what was going on by the way you explained everything. I could visualize what was happening, and you were just a newborn. And you said that the community in which you were birthed is Holmes County, in the poorest county in Mississippi, and one of the poorest counties
in the United States
in the United States. That's just really very interesting. Well, what was that county like during that time period? What were the racial relations like?
It was basically like separate, and it was where all of the African Americans or black, whichever term we would like to refer to ourselves as, lived. And as you know, we were always across the tracks. And across the track, in the area where I live, there were staunch, prolific African American individuals. Basically, the majority of them had their own little businesses. And in a sense, I can say I grew up on what they call the low end.
What does that mean?
And the low end is like, they were saying that this is the lower part of Pickens because it's not a hill. And where the majority of our people live, it's kind of like up on a hill. But we were the ones who always had our own homes, along with our own businesses. And the majority of the personnel would always come on the low end, which I call the end somewhat back in the day as you would think about Ferris Street. It was flourishing and there were knowledgeable people.
The lower end.
The lower end
Okay.
was. And further around, there were cotton fields. And this brings me to a granny, or a midwife granny whom I know, who's a relative of mine, and I'm going to get more information about her, which she was a beautiful spirit. Her name was Emma Mabry.
She was your relative?
She was
Relative?
a third cousin of mine. And she was a midwife whom delivered many children. All of them had great respect for her. She kept in touch with them, and she knew all the children that she had helped be born by their names, their family history, and basically who they were. And not only was she their midwife, she ended up with a lot of them being their babysitter. And there was a story, and I'm not sure who it was, that they were in the cotton fields picking cotton. And one lady was pregnated, and she had gone into labor, and her child was conceived, rather was born in the cotton field on a cotton sack. And I was told that they wrapped the child after giving it clean in what we call a croaker sack. And for people who don't know what a croaker sack is, it's kind of like a nylon sack. It's brown, thick, and heavy. And after they given birth to the child, they still got the cotton sack, weighed the cotton, and the mother had picked 300 pounds of cotton.
So are you saying that the baby was born on the cotton sack?
On the cotton sack.
Okay.
Where that was the only place that they could actually give birth because they were in the cotton field. And all the other personnel around would go and try and do what they could. And they had to find water. And I don't know how far they were in the field, but they said people had to run to get water in order to have the child clean. But the child was healthy. There are other stories that they said most babies that were born of midwives are more healthier than some of the ones that were delivered in the hospital.
Okay. Well, that really had to be a moment for everybody. Not only the mother giving birth, the midwife catching the baby, but also I could imagine a lot of chaos or activity was going around in terms of trying to assist the midwife, the mother, and the baby.
I'm sure it was. I'm thinking it was chaos.
Yes, that's what it
Especially with
sounds
the
like.
men that were in the field, and you know how we are.
Mhm.
We are the brave ones, but we're the first to panic. So as you can imagine, we would say that there was a whole lot of hooping and a hollering.
Yes, yes, lots of excitement.
Someone was saying, go fetch the water, go fetch this, go fetch that. The
Well-
baby's on the way.
Right. Did anybody tell you how long it took for a baby to come in the midst of the chaos?
Well, I've heard some stories where some mothers would go in labor around 12 p.m. or 12 noon. And it would be late, sometimes later that evening or earlier the next morning before they would give birth. And I was told that all the midwife would do was sat there with them, and they would take linen, or I'm trying to keep this in layman terms, and I wanted to be able to reach the masses. They would take white sheets, fold them, and wrap them around the upper portion of the mother's stomach and around the lower portion of the stomach. And this was to help bring on the labor pains and to induce the birth of the child.
Okay, they would take the white sheets to wrap around the stomach?
The top portion of the stomach and the lower portion of the stomach. And I guess that served as some type of band to maybe
induce labor.
ease the pain or to induce the labor.
Well, it sounds like they really didn't know what they were doing
Especially
in the
with,
interest of the mother and the child.
especially without any, as we would say, medical training.
Okay. Without any medical training, that is just really appalling. What was the granny midwife's name who caught babies in your family and or community? Can you tell me again?
One was Miss Angie Ward, and the other was Emma Mabry. And I have to do more research with relatives who are out of state to ask them of the other ones. But those two were well known and well respected.
Okay.
And they were also very clean, which reminds me of a medical term that they utilize for nurses. They were not surrogates, and the word surrogate means a nasty nurse.
Okay.
These midwives were respected Florence Nightingales, if you would want to refer to them as so.
Okay. I've not heard her name in a long time. It reigned victoriously when I was coming up. Florence Nightingale. Was the midwife, I think you said that one of the midwives was a member of your family.
Yes, she was.
And was that Angie Ward? Angie?
Well, according to, basically both of them were supposedly to have been related to me.
Okay.
And Miss Angie was supposed to have been related to me by her husband, whom she was married to, and all I know is we never knew was we called him Bro Ward.
Okay.
And I'm thinking
They
that
were
was
your relatives.
that was because of his connection to the church.
Okay.
Everyone just referred to him as Bro Ward, Brother Ward, or Bro Ward.
So how old were these two midwives? Angie Ward was about how old during that time?
I'm thinking she might have been in her latter 50s or 60s.
Okay. What about Emma Mabry?
She was doing midwifery around in her 20s and 30s and on up until we were allowed to go to the hospital and have children.
Okay. Did these midwives catch babies beyond your family?
Yes, they would serve basically the surrounding areas.
Okay.
And we
Which were?
can say about 3 counties: Holmes, Yazoo, Madison, because they're all closely connected. There is about a 7 miles different from the Holmes County to Madison County. And we'll go approximately 1 mile from Holmes to Yazoo County.
Okay.
Because we're set basically around the Big Black River.
Well, did the midwives catch both black and white babies?
I rarely know about what Miss Angie did, but I'm thinking that Miss Mabry did because she was a domestic worker. And she reared the other children.
Okay. Though she lived in a segregated community?
Yes.
Okay. Why did the midwives catch babies outside of the medical clinics and hospitals?
Well, reason number one, from what I was told, and it did ring true, we were not basically allowed to go to hospitals.
Why was that?
I guess it was because of the times in which we were living in and the conditions in which we lived under.
Such as?
Where, the majority of our personnel worked for the, I don't want to sound racist, but worked for the white folks. And we had to do basically what we were told to have done. And it was, the majority of us, if you didn't work on their plantation, you either worked in their homes, because some jobs were limited to our people. And we had to do what I'm thinking it was Malcolm X, and I don't want to say that I'm quoting. We had to do by any means necessary to survive as a race of people.
So, working on the plantations as well as other jobs, you had to do what you were told.
Exactly.
What were some of the other jobs, some of the jobs beyond plantation life?
There were some people who would go to other states and basically work in what we would look forward to was at the sugar mill, which was in Louisiana, where they would be getting cane, to produce various products that we utilize, such as sugar, syrup, and whatever products that the cane was made out of, which was like a seasonal job. And then there were some who actually worked on the railroad. And we had very few people during that time that worked in the industrial areas.
Now, these railroad jobs, were they in-state or out-of-state or both?
They were both in and out of state.
Well, how often did they see their families?
Some would see their families, basically it depends upon where they worked or what type of work they were doing. When they would go to we'll just say to Louisiana, and would be gone for 2 to 3 months before returning home. And some will get a chance to come home maybe bi-weekly, depending upon their transportation mode and if they had any forms of transportation.
Okay, so that was a lot of shifting going on. Some bi-weekly. It just really depended on the job, the circumstances, and the people involved. All right. Well, can you tell me if the midwives were refused opportunities to catch babies in medical clinics and or hospitals? Were they rejected?
Some were.
Okay,
and
can
it, you know, we would say it depends upon the region. In our area, yeah, they were rejected because you didn't have access, as I stated, to the privilege to really go to the hospital or to a doctor's office. It all depends. And if you were allowed, as usual, you had to use the back door where you would be served or you would be treated, rather, which would be a better word.
Use the back door for treatment? What about the front door?
You were not allowed to go in the front door.
Was
We are
anyone
talking in
allowed?
the 50s and the 60s.
Was anyone allowed to go into the front door, go through the front door?
No people of color were. They were always told to use the back door.
What about the whites?
Naturally, you know, they were always going to be privileged. I call them the privileged ones. They're going through the front door.
Oh, the whites could use the front door, enter through the front door.
Enter through the front door.
Enter and exit.
Through the front door. Not only in their establishment, the same would apply if they were to come to your home. They would come in your front door.
Where would the blacks go to their home?
Through the back door.
So if the whites came to the blacks' homes, it was the same procedure.
They would enter your front door. And you would greet them.
How were they greeted?
Good evening, good morning, yes sir, no sir.
Well, what if the blacks did not adhere to the norm?
Well, naturally, you know, there were going to be repercussions and circumstances. Some would be battered, or even some would lose their lives. It all depends upon who or whom you cross. And what type feelings they had towards you being a person of color. Was
there a certain age bracket in terms of this that you're talking about? Could a youngster, a white youngster, if a white youngster came to the black home, how was the white youngster addressed?
As a young master.
Young master.
Or master, whatever his name was, last name was.
If I'm 2, if I'm 3, how does the black adult address me, the white child?
They would just come, little baby or little precious one. But it depends if you were able to communicate and the child could understand. Naturally, they were going to be called master. And they were going to be greeted with yes, sir, and no, sir.
Okay. So they grew up like that?
With that mentality.
Okay.
Whereas we had to respect them at all costs.
And they were called Master, White Master?
Young Master.
Young Master, Young Master, in Holmes County.
In Holmes County.
And the girls were called what?
Miss or Missy.
Did racism interfere with the midwife catching babies? And if so, how so?
That's a question I really can't answer because I don't know, how did they serve the other community. So that would be a question that I would have to ask someone else who knows more about that than me. And we don't want to do anything to discredit
Okay, so
or
you have
to
to do some
plagiarize.
research.
We have to do further research on
Okay.
that topic.
Did the midwife talk about medical doctors or nurses who discriminated against her?
The ones whom I've talked with, no, they didn't have anything to say.
Okay.
They would just go on and perform their duties to the best of their abilities.
Did medical doctors then prevent mothers from having children at hospitals? The medical doctors, did they prevent the mothers from birthing?
That's a portion that I really can't answer
Okay.
because I remember that there were some blacks who were fortunate enough to go to a hospital, and that was the African American hospital in Yazoo City, Mississippi, which I think a lot of people have forgotten. And there were doctors there who could perform various operations or deliveries because it was an African American hospital.
Oh, it
And
was an
I
African American?
Yes.
Do you know who the doctor was?
I know one was a Dr. Huddleston, but I have to go back and find out more information about this because it was an African American hospital in Yazoo City, Mississippi, where I've had some friends of mine whose parent had given birth to them there at such a facility.
Okay. Was Dr. Huddleston an African American man?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Did the midwife, any of the midwives, have certificates?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that either. But I do know that from what I've heard that they, during the time, I know they had an 8th grade education because the 8th grade education had carried more weight than the 12th grade during that particular era. During the 50s and the 60s. That's the era in which we are talking about.
More weight than 12th grade
Yes,
during the 50s and 60s?
yes. Well, from back, because once upon a time, if you had an 8th grade education, you qualified to be a full-fledged school teacher.
Yes, I recall people talking about that. There was something outstanding about the person who had earned an 8th grade
Education.
So many things that person could do, as opposed to people who had not gotten to that particular rank. Was the midwife, to your knowledge, certified by the county?
Now that is a very good question. I'm not knowledgeable of that. I was told, most people say that it was a God-given gift, and this was something that they were just naturally gifted with and could perform.
So it looks like, in this case of Holmes County, at least, that was expected by so many people, because this midwife had the gift of bringing forth life, catching the babies.
Yes.
Okay. How was the midwife then compensated for catching the babies?
Now, that is something that I hope everybody can understand. Whereas we have to kind of bring the midwifery with the church now, where people were not able to actually pay a fee to the midwife, they would pound them.
Okay.
And what we mean by pounding is perhaps she might have needed some butter, flour, or whatever cooking utensils. And the family would just donate that they had to them. And those who were able to pay would, I'm told, would pay a fee of maybe $3, $4, $5. At that time, currency had more weight than it does now.
So there were some folks who were able to pay.
Yes.
I remember growing up in a church where it was said, you pound the pastor, because there were people who didn't have anything else to give the pastor. So whatever those goodies were in the pounding process, that's how they paid the pastor.
And also, you know, that was the way they would keep some. And even in, like, the midwife case, if she'd come from afar, we would say, basically maybe, and it's dark, we say if she lived more than about 5, 6 miles away, she would end up staying in the residence with the person who was giving birth.
Okay. And what happened in her own home?
If she had children, I'm thinking if they were old enough, the eldest one would stay and see about the others, along with the husband, or if she had one.
But she took care of the mother.
Yes.
Who was
having
having the child.
Having the child.
Did she follow up afterwards?
I'm not sure. I just know, you know, as I was telling you, that some of the children whom some of the midwife had brought into the world always stayed in touch and respected them, and in some cases, maybe a couple of them became their personal babysitters.
Okay, okay.
While the parent worked or whatever, and they would, you know, compensate them for seeing about the child. And if someone was giving birth, the midwife would take the children with them.
Okay, okay. Was a midwife forced into retirement?
That's a very interesting question. From my perspective, I'm saying they were, because of having to have license. You know, as we say, you know, in order to be a midwife, you need to be licensed nowadays, just as a nurse. And we were going through this period, you know, where we were segregated, and then integration come about. And there's where the new laws, rules, and regulations come about, where you must have everything in black and white in order to perform these duties.
And so if they did not have everything in black and white,
And they were not to practice without anyone knowing it. But some still would help a person, because a lot of people couldn't make it to the hospital. And we have to think, a lot of our people didn't have transportation. or no one to carry them. So they would still call upon whom they knew that would be capable of helping them to bring the child into the world.
Okay, so some of the midwives did not have transportation.
Right.
And they had to depend on
Others. And a lot of times, up until I want to say until maybe the latter 60s, there were people who were still using horse and buggy.
They were using horse and buggy
As far as transportation to get about.
Before the 60s?
Well, during up until, I say the latter 60s.
Okay, all the way to that point.
To that point.
Well, who were some of the people who were transporting the midwives?
Just various people in the community, I would say, those who had transportation and could carry them. It's basically like when there was a time, you know, if you wanted to, I'd say, to have gone to the store and you lived in the rural, you would start out walking. And therefore, I had a car and I was going in that direction, I would see you walking, I would stop and just give you a ride.
So if the midwife was walking the miles, I think you mentioned earlier, 5 or 6 miles sometimes to the home to deliver the baby. If the midwife was out there walking and you came along, for instance, and saw her, you would offer her a ride.
I would just stop and give her a ride. You know, during those times, that was the way of many people got from point A to point B, just by, I'd say you have a car, and I don't. You know me, and I know you. And you see me walking, and I'm walking in the direction that you're headed in. You wouldn't ask any question, you just pull over, give me a ride to whatever destination, or give me a ride as far as you were going if you were not going in the same specific direction that I was. And it was where you wait or you continue to walk until someone else give you a ride.
So that was commonplace.
Yeah, it was
what
common.
You say.
Yes.
Okay. One way that the midwife and the mother and the baby would be taken care of, so to speak. What were family relations like with the midwife, as we shift to another subject matter? What were those family relations like when you were coming up?
It was basically like, you know, the expression we say that it takes a village to raise a child. Everybody was on one accord.
Tell me about that.
You had, and maybe I didn't have, or if I needed a cup of flour, cup of sugar, maybe some eggs or whatever it was that I wanted, I would go and ask you, and if you had it, you would in turns give it to me. If I had it, you would in turns, I would in turns give it to you. It was a good, well, I'd say not theory, it was a very good bartering, a lot of bartering going on. You exchange one good for another.
Okay. Like quid pro quo. Quid pro quo.
Exactly.
Quid pro quo.
Exactly.
Okay, okay. The barter system. Do you recall any contributions a midwife made within the family and or the community beyond catching babies? What, in other words, look at her from a holistic perspective. What was she like in the community?
Very well respected. She carried herself in a noble manner, and the young ladies would look up to her because of the way she carried herself, and because of the actions and the things that she would do. And it seemed as if she was walking, well, I would say, so to speak, it might seem humorous, walking on eggs. It was just like, I am known in this community, and I have to carry myself a certain way. I have to act a certain way. And I have to do certain things because Washington is watching you.
Okay. Well, looking at her in acting a certain way, that's Granny Midwife so-and-so. In the church, was she a leader? What were some of the duties she performed in her church?
Well, some were ushers, some were, as we call, on the motherboard or members of the missionary society. It all depended upon what her talents were. And in some cases, you know, in the church, it was like, if you are married, you know, the female can have various positions. But if you're single, you know, there are some positions are limited.
Okay.
Because of the laws and statutes of the church.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of those?
Okay, a great prime example. Just say a granny midwife had delivered a baby to a woman who was single. The single woman really couldn't have a so-called, as we say, position in the church. Because, you know, and that's when you have to think of it biblically, what happens to a woman scorned. You know, there's a scorned woman, and then there's what we would say a virtuous woman who's married and have certain standards, and by this one being single and with a child, there was a place where you used to have to go before the church and stand in front of the congregation and apologize to them for having a child out of wedlock.
Okay, what if she were a single woman with high character?
That as long as she had no children, and you know, some people will call them spinsters, she could have a position, but it still would not be, you know, as we would say during those times, it was like, as far as just being like a mother of the church, she would probably be more of like a servant in various capacities.
Okay, but as if she was a single woman of moral character, then there were some positions, you
Right.
say, that
You
she,
know, that she was still respected, but the positions were still limited,
limitations, okay, okay,
as sometimes we see now.
okay. How many babies did the midwife catch in the family? And do you recall any of their names? When you speak of Miss Angie, for instance, how many babies did she catch, and how many did Miss Emma catch?
I want to say from what I was told, Miss Angie caught about a third of our population.
Okay. When you say your population, do you mean within your family, or do you mean home?
I'm meaning within the city or within the town.
Okay.
You know, I'm speaking about our entire community.
Okay. Third of the community's population. Okay. What about
And
Miss
Miss
Emma?
Emma would as we say, had taken up the slack, which I would say she had done basically about the same. But she was more extensive with hers because that's where the story we gotten, where she delivered a baby in the field.
Okay.
So she was a bit more rigorous.
Well, did the midwives have any assistance during the birthing process?
The only assistance I'm aware of is it would be basically by some of the family members in the home in which she was going to deliver the baby.
So what might they have done to assist?
At that time, the boiling water process and giving the clean towels or sheets or whatever. And you know, at that time, when we were being conceived, when we were being born, you know, we didn't have Pampers and what have you. We had diapers, and they would, you know, ensure that they had the diapers and all of that ready. So when the child comes in after they clean it up, that was that, and they wrap them up, and their wife would complete the birth certificate and go on about her business.
Okay, well, with the assistance that the midwives were receiving, if there were children in the family, were they allowed to be in the room?
No. You know, even in those days, children had their places in the home. And it was always, whenever adults were around, the children knew what to do. You know that you were going to go in another room or another place of the house, and you were not to come out.
Okay.
Because they had a rule.
Okay.
When grown-ups are around, children are not allowed around grown-ups,
Okay.
hearing grown-up conversations or seeing what grown-ups are doing.
Okay. Well, during those particular moments, when the children were locked away, for instance, once baby appeared, did they see baby? There must have been some instances when they heard the baby cry, but they did not know how baby came.
No. It was just that, you know, you have a brother, you have a sister, and the myth was, well, where did they come from? And you know, we have such a colorful descriptions of giving answers to a question that are not really answers, where they will tell you that found him up on the cabbage stack, or we went by the brook and there was the baby.
This is what the adults say.
The adults would say to the children.
Okay. So they told the children where the babies came from, in their own way.
In their own way, but not actually really telling them truthfully because of the myth. And I want to say their lack of knowledge or not knowing exactly how to broach the particular situation.
Broach the subject, okay. Or maybe because of the gulf between the age brackets. The child is too young to understand this now and should not know the birthing process. So we will say so-and-so and so-and-so
Right.
to the child.
But then, and I'm thinking what it was just, a lot of it has to do with the way our ancestors were reared. You know, it was like, you are going to say this or say that because you don't want this child to get, as they call, grown at an early age.
That the child should stay in the child's
child's place.
Okay, okay. Do you have a story about a black doctor who was in the community during the time period of the midwife?
No, I don't. I'm not knowledgeable of of one.
A black doctor. Did the midwife spend time with any of the children she caught?
You know,
Was she around them?
as I stated earlier, some of the midwives would actually, if their parent were working and they were small children, she would be like their sitter. Or, you could drop your child off over to Aunt Janie's or whomever, and they would entrust the midwife with it. And that would be another way in which she would subsidize her living.
Okay. How did the children themselves interact with the midwives?
Basically, how children relate to their teachers. Some would engage, and others wouldn't. And that has always been a saying that you can tell the type human being an adult is by the way in which they relate.
Okay. So
if a child was withdrawn from you as an adult, basically they would say that you have to watch her. There's something that's not right if this child is withdrawn from them. And a lot of our people still believe that to this day, especially if the infant is unable to speak or whatever, and you let someone hold your baby, and the baby would begin to just cry and just, we'd say become rebellious. It was a feeling they would say that the child had that you could judge that adult by.
Okay. Can you provide names and contact information of the children who interacted with the midwives?
I will, once I get back, I will get that info for you.
Okay.
Because I want to ensure that I have the right personnel.
Okay, thank you. Did the midwife talk about medical doctors or nurses who discriminated against them? Did the midwives?
The ones whom I know, I never heard them really say anything about them.
Okay. Did medical doctors prevent mothers from having children at the hospitals? Did the medical doctors themselves prevent the mothers from birthing in the hospital?
I'm not really aware of that. And, I wouldn't want to expound on it erroneously, but where we live now, I do know that in the 60s they would at least admit some mothers to the hospital, and, to let them deliver the child.
During the 60s?
During the latter 60s.
Mothers were admitted?
Right, to the hospital.
Okay.
I know that to be a matter of fact, because as I stated earlier, I'm the product of a midwife, but all my siblings were born in the hospital.
What hospital? Was there a hospital in Holmes County?
Yes, it was at that particular time. It was Lexington Hospital. That's what we refer to it as.
One hospital?
One hospital.
Okay.
For the entire county.
Okay, Lexington Hospital.
Right.
Okay. Was the midwife the community doctor or leader? I think you said earlier that you did not have knowledge of a black doctor in the community. Was the midwife considered to be something like a doctor in some instances? Did she use herbs, medicine?
Well, and some, and as you were saying, now that's something. Some of the midwives had various home remedies that they would tell the mothers, you use this for that, you use this for that, and whatever. I've forgotten what it was. Oh, if a child had colic, what we call colic, which I didn't know was just simply gas. And some babies were bothered with gas really more severely than others. And they would use, and I hope that I can still, asphyxia.
Okay.
That was
A
something.
difficult word
Yes.
to even spell.
It was asphyxia. And it was more like, it was a little chalky substance like so.
Mhm.
And you would cut it and kind of grind it up.
Mhm.
And you would place it in the baby's milk,
In the baby's milk?
in the formula.
Okay.
Well, not the formula, in the baby's milk.
Okay.
Because, you know, basically, before formulas come out, all babies were either breastfed or drinking, as we would laugh and say, pet milk.
Yes, yes. I remember my children are 11 years apart. For the older daughter, being a young woman, I didn't even dream about breastfeeding. But for the younger one, I did, and I breastfed her. And so it was truly a different
An experience.
Mhm. Was the midwife active in the community and the church? I think you talked about this at some point earlier.
Yes, they were.
Okay. What stands out most in your mind about the two midwives you mentioned?
They were humble people. And they were respected.
Mm-hmm.
And really, if you think about it, they were just as we say, regular Jane Does.
Okay. Were they down to earth?
Yes. When I said regular Jane
say they
Doe,
were?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
They were just down to earth people.
Mm-hmm.
They
Okay.
were not those who exalted themselves above others.
Okay. Were there other granny midwives within your family?
I'm sure there were very many because we have a heavily populated family,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have to do more research to ask them
Mm-hmm.
about the ones in whom they know.
Okay. Were there other granny midwives serving in the community when the midwives you mentioned were serving?
If so, I don't have any knowledge of them.
Okay. We have just a few more to go. Did males play a role during the birthing process?
Not to my knowledge, Dr. Vincent. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in some cases there might have been, but I'm not knowledgeable of any.
Okay. How were blacks connected to cotton within the community? What complications, for instance, if there were any, did they encounter? Can you tell me about the role, in other words, that cotton, you know, that's such a big industry even now, the role that cotton played during this time period, the 50s and the 60s?
As you said, that was one way. That was basically how the majority of persons would be able to provide for their family by actually going, picking cotton,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, getting the benefits. That was their job. They would get up in the fields, get up early in the morning, as if they was on a regular job,
Mm-hmm.
pick cotton until the noon hour, take a little break so some would go home so they could prepare them a little meal, return back to the fields,
Mm-hmm.
carry their children, and they would pick cotton from, as we would say, from sunup until sundown.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that's part of what we have called now daylight saving time, how
Mhm.
that began in order to have them work longer hours.
So that was how somebody started?
That was their central motif for provision for their family,
Okay.
working on the cotton fields, just as we have people who are in the industrial areas or on various jobs now
Mm-hmm.
to supply for their family. And that's how a lot of their children were reared up to pick cotton. For instance, I've had friends who could not go to school until certain times, till after they gathered the crops, till all the cotton had been picked.
So did they work in the fields, when you talk about the seasons, did they work in the fields several months without school, and then attended school several months, and then went back to the field?
Well, yes. Basically, you could say it was in the spring, they would go and hoe the cotton.
They hoed in the spring?
In the spring, from sun up to sundown.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they basically, actually hoed the cotton had grown, and when it would begin to bloom,
Mm-hmm.
and once all the cotton had bloomed,
Mm-hmm.
which would be, I'd say it would start around September,
Mm-hmm.
and they would gather it from anywhere from September to basically about December.
They would gather from September
To about
to
December, on the days that were permissible. And when it rained, those who had to work in the fields
Mm-hmm.
would be allowed to attend school.
Well, did this slow the educational process down for many of the blacks who were there working in the fields?
Yes, it did for quite a few of them. Because whereas I'm attending school every day,
Mm-hmm.
going with the entire school year,
Mm-hmm.
that places me a step ahead of you, because I have the privilege of going to school every day and not having to go to the field.
Mm-hmm.
But for the students who were really, I just say, naturally advanced, or who were intelligent, the days that they were out, when they would come to school, they could still perform
Mm-hmm.
and keep up and not being held back. It has just been if you just look at the whole thing, even with the midwife, granted, this is such a broad subject, you can't just discuss the midwife without discussing our way of life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a vital part of history, and it deals with all of us, especially those who know and the ones who do not know.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to bring all of our history, period, to our people, so that they will be able to appreciate the sacrifices that have been made and would understand what has been done, what needs to be done, and what we still need to do.
Okay. Do you have any artifacts on hand that you might want to donate to the Smith-Robertson Museum, like pictures of the Granny Midwives, like the clothes that they wore, the certificates, we talked about them earlier, whether or not they had those, bedpans, things like that were used in the birthing process, or just anything that the midwives may have had that they used within their family structures. Were there instruments like the hoes that they may have used to plant the soil and what have you, till the soil? What?
That's why I was saying that I want to refer to a relative of mine whom I'm glad is still alive,
Mm-hmm.
to see if she has any artifacts
Okay.
of her relatives from her mother. And if so, I would like to ask if she would be willing to donate it, or see if I can come up with some photographs of the midwives whom I've known.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. We do have a form, the deed of gift form, for the donors to put the items down that they are donating, like the the bag that the granny midwife have, if maybe you could find it, and those other kinds of objects I mentioned. There are many more, but those are just some that come to mind. Anything that midwife might have used could be a benefit for the entire community, especially when it comes down to the 2 Scott Ford houses that are located there on Cohee Street in Jackson. Virginia Scott Ford was a granny midwife in that particular area, and the story goes that she did all of the work herself as a midwife, that she didn't have anyone to assist her. And those houses are being restored as part of this Farish Street Historical District. And we know that back in the day, Farish Street was such a prominent place of business. And so these artifacts that are being donated are essential to that Smith-Robertson Museum. Very, very essential. And thinking about tourists in the long haul who will be coming to visit those 2 homes, and seminars and conferences being held about this historic Mississippi granny midwife would just be so important for people not only here in Mississippi, but all over the world, you see. And so, more than likely, I won't be on the scene, and many others who are still here. But generations to come will be able to benefit. You were told earlier, independent of the interview, that we are doing the essay contest. Your region is one of those regions that the children are being exposed to storytellers like you, who will tell them the contributions that you have told me during this interview. Get those children in your family and that particular neighborhood excited about these granny midwives. Get them so excited and encourage them in the excitement to write an essay for competition. That would be the way I would do it. Get them excited and then encourage them. So this contest is extended until October the 15th. Since I'm the oral historian, I think I can do that because you and I are just now interviewing. And we really do want you, Mr. Roberts, to excite the children. It does not matter how many. Could be 1, could be 15 or more, but get them excited. Again, I am Dr. Janice K. Neal Vincent, oral historian of Scott Ford House Incorporated and W.K. Kellogg team. My guest today here at Farish Street Baptist Church is Mr. James Roberts. And we certainly do appreciate you, Mr. Roberts, for coming. You're coming here from Pickens, Mississippi, and you have shared so much, not only about 1 granny midwife, but about 2. And then you broadened the perspective when you talked on other things about contributions that the Mississippi granny midwives in that particular area of Holmes County made to the community. Very exciting. And we thank you in behalf of Dr. Alfredine Harrison, who is the executor of this project. We are so grateful that you could come. In behalf of the planning committee, those who are working along with Dr. Harrison, we are very grateful. And we wish you all the best.
And I pray that this is very successful and that we can reach out to all our young people so they can see that all is not lost.
Yes, very important. This ends our interview. Thank you so much. And my time is?
8:08.
Pardon?
8:08.